Hey everybody, Karaoke here with the last in my video series on meta events, at least for now. Who knows, maybe I'll feel like talking about it more again in the future. If you have not watched the first two parts, I'd recommend you do that now before you watch this video. In part one, I talked a little bit about where meta events come from, their history, why ArenaNet added them to the game. In part two, I talked a little bit about how they developed since the game has come out. And while I wasn't super explicit about this in the video, hopefully the thing you took away from that video is that meta events have developed to a point where they're relatively set in how they work. We understand it. There's a couple models that ArenaNet uses to push out meta events, but essentially they have stabilized, if you want to use an optimistic or a positive word for it, or stagnated if you want to use a more negative word for it. In this video, I want to put forward an alternate suggestion for how I think ArenaNet could move forward with Guild Wars 2 open world content that continues to build on the base game and expand the different things that we have available for us to do while moving in a slightly different direction. All right, let's see if we can encapsulate in the shortest amount of time as possible what ArenaNet did with meta events between the time the game came out and between now. How did we get from Centaurs to here? Well, they started by adding depth and complexity, by adding more events that chain together, by adding more bosses or more lanes. They started to require coordination between different groups and lanes. They increased the challenge significantly, and then they also built a new reward system around it, something that people felt was good and worth doing over and over again. So if this is a formula, we started with meta events, and then we added complexity, challenge, rewards. What I think ArenaNet should do next is take that same idea, take some base content in the game, add complexity, add challenge, add rewards, and give us something new, more exciting, and more replayable. And I think the starting point should be mini dungeons. Guild Wars 2 launched with a number of mini dungeons, and there's not a really clear definition from ArenaNet about what they think of a mini dungeon as being. For me, though, mini dungeons combine a few things. They have a combat element, they have puzzles, and they have platforming, or kind of like jumping around on different things. What I like about mini dungeons in Guild Wars 2 is a lot of the same things that I like about dungeons in Guild Wars 2. There are a variety of activities, a variety of environments, and they let you use your skills both for combat and for non-combat things in interesting ways. One of the great complaints about Guild Wars 2 dungeons is that you do a lot of skipping and stealthing, but I've always found that to be really interesting. I think it's a fun way to take certain skills or mechanics that are in the game and use them in creative ways to solve problems or puzzles. Same thing for something like Mesmer's Portal. Some of the things you can do with Portal and Blinks is really interesting in the Guild Wars 2 engine. Now, the mini dungeons that exist in Guild Wars 2 now, they tend to be relatively simple, and I would think most of the people who have played those in the game are saying, no, Karaoke, look. Mini dungeons, they cannot support the sort of fun, long-term activity and playstyle and rewards that meta events can. Well, guess what? We thought those same things about meta events way back when as well, that something like the Centaur event in Harathi Hinterlands couldn't be the entire basis for an expansion for the game, and well, look what we got with Heart of Thorns. So if you agree with me with the basic premise that meta events have kind of hit their limit for what sort of changes and what sort of evolution ArenaNet can do with them, I think it's worth taking a look at mini dungeons. And before I go any further, I do want to state, I don't think ArenaNet should stop making meta events or get rid of meta events. I think those are fine. They're decent content and a good way of presenting it, but I think there should be other ways that they try to move forward and push the game past where it is right now. So let's talk about what that might look like using mini dungeons as the base. I think one of the most important elements to building up mini dungeons into replayable content in Guild Wars 2 is going to be variety. Each mini dungeon has to be unique and a little different from each other, and it has to support different play styles. What do I mean by that? Well, some mini dungeons should be more combat heavy, others more platforming heavy, others more puzzle heavy. I think there should be mini dungeons that require you to pay to get in or present some item. And that's something that exists inside of the base mini dungeons. There's mini dungeons where you have to have a key or something to unlock them. Ula's Lab is an example of that. I think some of the mini dungeons should be more challenging and require a lot more coordination, while others are easier. I think some of the mini dungeons should scale based on the number of players inside of them, and others should not. Hell, I'd even say a mini dungeon or two should have some things where a really good mesmer who knows his way around can basically skip the entire thing for people. I think there should be a mix of different ways of approaching these mini dungeons, and that people who take the time to play through them and learn each dungeon on its own should be rewarded for doing so. Speaking of rewards, you know what's a great system is the Dungeon Frequenter system. This is a system where there are different dungeon paths, and you can go and do any of them off of a list. Once you complete 8 of them, you get a particular reward. That's a system that I think could work very well for this new mini dungeon system. If we have, say, 10 or 12 mini dungeons, and you complete 5 or 6, you might get some individual reward for each mini dungeon, and that one might scale based on difficulty or length or some other factor. So the harder mini dungeons or the longer mini dungeons have a bigger reward. And then after you've completed a certain number of unique mini dungeons in the set, boom, you get an extra bonus reward, which encourages people to go and do multiple mini dungeons and not just run one particular one when they feel like it or one that they think has the best reward to effort. I'd love to see these new mini dungeons have some form of currency, which can be used to buy skins or other rewards. And actually, I think the one that might be most interesting to me would be tying this to the order system and earning some sort of order faction or currency with these. So imagine you log in, you can go to an order representative, like your Whispers representative, and they have some sort of bounty out. You run these particular mini dungeons to kill these big bad boss things and go back to them and get some sort of reward. It would be similar to traditional questing in a way. It would get people out into these open world mini dungeons, and then you get rewarded appropriately for your time. So to wrap things up, guys, I have been frustrated with ArenaNet for a few years now. I love Guild Wars 2, and I really enjoy playing the game, primarily for the people that I get to play with. I got a lot of great people in my guild who make every day pretty awesome, getting to log in and play with them. But the game itself has been moving in directions that I don't necessarily always agree with. I think raids have been a really great addition to the game, but by abandoning dungeons and really putting a lot more focus on these open world meta events, I felt like ArenaNet has abandoned one particular area that was always really great in Guild Wars 2. Small group casual content. Raids are great, but they're not particularly casual. Open world's all right, but you kind of have to rely on other people in the map. You can't do it just with 3 or 4 buddies go in and do an open world meta. You have to deal with taxiing between maps and making sure there's people there and large scale coordination. And usually if people don't see commander tags, they won't even attempt to do the events. So I think there's this middle ground that ArenaNet's been missing, where you can just grab a few people and there's no gear requirements, and you can run in and do content. You could go and say that something like low tier fractals is meant to fill that void, but there are so many problems with fractals between either requiring AR at the higher levels or between the rewards being hilariously bad at the lower levels, the intense time limiting of rewards in fractals. So if you spend more than half an hour on them, you start to really lose that reward very quickly. I think there's just a lot of issues with the fractal system that could use some help. Now, dungeons do still exist, instance dungeons, and I think they're still great content that I enjoy doing with people on a semi-regular basis. But I'd love to see ArenaNet push that kind of content, this small group, relatively casual content, into other areas of the game. I think that the open world could support it through mini dungeons, and I'd be interested to see how they can take that existing system and start to add complexity, add rewards, add challenge to it, and make something that's much better, much in the same way that they added complexity and challenge and rewards to meta events to give us what we have now. Now, am I way off base? Am I wrong? Am I missing something obvious? Feel free to tell me down in the comments below. But I did really want to make this video because I think that whenever you complain about something, you should always put forward a suggestion on how it can be better. I've been complaining about meta events in the direction of ArenaNet for a while, and I thought it was time that I give some suggestions on how I think that they can do a little bit better, or something that I'd be interested in seeing. So that's it from me for now, guys. Thank you very much for watching this whole long video series if you have, and I will see you again hopefully sometime soon. Bye-bye.